Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming out here. We have a really great opportunity to engage with one of our exceptional artists. We're going to spend about an hour talking with Sue Arnson. Thanks for coming out, Sue.
Thanks for having me. It's a real privilege.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad you just agreed to join us. I'm going to read a little bio for Sue. Many of the people that are in the audience today know Sue. She is a fixture of the arts community and really producing exceptional works. We'll talk about some of those works that are behind us right now. One of those is part of our private collection. We really appreciate Sue's art. Sue's journey into painting is both inspiring and really unconventional. She didn't grow up with a brush in her hands, nor did she attend formal art school in her early years. In fact, it wasn't until you were 55 years old that you took up watercolor class here in Cumberland. What began as a creative curiosity quickly blossomed into a profound passion, one that has since evolved into a full-time artistic practice. Sue's paintings reflect a deep connection to nature, often evoking misty hillsides, seasonal shifts, and the essence of rural landscapes, without tying the viewer to the specific space. Her work is known for its rich use of colors, delicate abstraction, and an almost meditative quality that invites you to slow down and look closely. In addition to watercolor, Sue has explored a range of other mediums, including monotypes, we've talked about that a little bit, collage, and alcohol inks. Always pushing herself to stay curious and creative, she paints nearly every day at her home study known as the Loft Shop, where it serves as both a working studio and a welcoming gallery space. She also shares her passion for teaching, leading beginner-friendly workshops where she encourages others to explore art, no matter their age and background. Her belief is simple: creativity is for everyone. It's interesting you start with that and you talk about art being accessible and for everyone. We generally have a belief here in the gallery that art in all of its forms is good for the soul. It's good for the mind, it's good for the body, it's good for the mental health, right? Does that sort of reflect your interest in art and your creativity?
Absolutely.
Yeah, great. So you began, as I mentioned, early in your life, or later in your life of painting. What drew you to watercolors in that process?
Nothing drew me to watercolors. I had been on a vacation in Huacaltuco, Mexico, and it was very, very hot, and we had to go indoors during the bulk of the main day, and I happened to learn to paint on silk. And I painted on silk for several years. And I sold a lot of silk product. I wish I had one of them now because they're all gone. And I suddenly one day I was at the studio tours in Alexis Levine's gallery, and the thought occurred to me, you don't know a darn thing about color or design or anything else. Alexis, do you know anyone who teaches watercolor around here? Alexis taught every Monday down at the synagogue, and she said, yes, I do every Monday. So I decided to take her course, and it was a Monday, and I left. I'd ordered paints, I'd ordered brushes, and I came down on a Monday morning, and I cried all the way down the road. That's 30 minutes of serious crying. And I don't know what I'm doing. I've never done this before. Please help me know what to do. Show me the way. And I came down to this class, and Lex went around the room, and she said to everybody in the room, why are you taking this course? And I told her why. And she said to me, and I always kind of weep about this, it is my hope that you will fall in love with watercolor as I have. Wow. That's how I learned.
Can you explain why the emotional response to the moment?
Because it was such a gift. It was just such a coincidental gift in my life hadn't planned it, hadn't thought about it, nothing. And I walked out of that class that day, and I was hooked, and I fell in love with it that day. And I have that painting hanging on my studio today.
Wow, that almost sounds like a spiritual moment for you.
It was.
Wow, wonderful. So your work captures the feeling of place without the viewer being defined by a location. So it doesn't have to be that the painting is Cumberland, but it often looks like the region, right?
It always is. It's definitely the region. You know, I occasionally paint something out of region. Like I have a painting in my studio right now at my grandmother's house. If it has an emotional attachment, if it has a history in my life, I occasionally paint that, but I don't often. Almost everything is based in the Garrett County, Western Maryland area.
Is that more because that's where you live, or just you love the scenery, you love that method, that location?
I grew up in the state of Washington. My dad was an outdoorsman. My family were outdoors people. I absolutely loved living there. It broke my heart when I left, but I'm glad I did. And the first time I went to Garrett County, I just totally fell in love with the beauty of the area. And it was very typical for me to feel that way after my history.
Wow. And when I look at your art, it often feels almost spontaneous, and maybe even reactive to the light, the moment. Do you go into a piece planning it, or you just start painting?
No, I don't just start painting. I'm a student of Alexis Levine. I do it by her book. She's an old-time watercolor kind of teacher. I take a picture. I very seldom paint plein air, very seldom. It's just too much of a bother to haul the stuff around. I'm too lazy to do that. But I always take a picture, then I go home and I do a small value sketch. And after I do the value sketch, then I will sketch it onto the watercolor paper or whatever surface I'm using and paint it then. But it's a process of the photograph becoming a sketch, becoming the painting. I take the photographs, I'm driving around and I see something that strikes me and I'll stop and take a picture. I don't plan it at all. It's all everything is pretty spontaneous with me.
And do you schedule your painting moments, the hours, the times, or you capture a painting and you just say, I've got to paint that, or you photograph it?
Well, I do have that happen, that I get something going, working in my head, and I have a painting, I have two paintings in my head right now that I haven't had time to go do. But I'm pretty spontaneous about what I paint. I was told the first year I painted by Jim McNeil, who was a fabulous watercolor painter in Garrett County, and I took a workshop with him that first summer I was painting, and he said, if you want to be a painter, you need to paint every day for 5 years, and if you're really lucky, you will be one. And I believed him, and I did it. And I do it.
Wow. What does a common painting day look like for you? Walk us through that day.
I don't schedule time to go to the studio. I live on 30 acres. I have a lot of stuff I have to do. I'm very involved in my community in several areas. It just and I don't paint after dark, ever. I don't like the light. I can't do it. And I do what I need to do in the morning, and I float out to the studio sometime in the afternoon. And I don't spend like 5 hours out there. I'll work for an hour or two, and then I'll go in. But much of what I'm doing besides painting is framing and matting and experimenting with other stuff, because I do other stuff.
And what is something you're experimenting with now?
Well, that's how I learned alcohol ink. That was just kind of a seat in the pants thought. Lisa Shire is an absolutely fabulous alcohol ink painter, and she's a friend of mine. She comes from her husband grew up in my neighborhood, and I saw her work and fell in love with it. And I asked her if she'd work with me, and she said no. And so I had to figure it out for myself. So I haven't advanced terribly, but I sure love doing it. But I see something and I think, oh yeah, I'm going to do that. I'm going to try that. I've done it over lots of things.
So that statement, and I hear you speaking in terms of creativity, innovation, fearlessness, and saying, I'm just going to dive in and I'm going to practice, experiment. I'm going to try this. It seems like that's what you started with, and you've been motivated ever since. Was that your approach to other areas of life previously, or was it inspired by art?
No, I grew up in Seattle in, I don't even want to tell you when, the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And we didn't have art in Seattle then. If you go to Seattle now, they got art. They got it everywhere. But I didn't, the first time I saw a real painting, I was 20 years old, and I walked into the Louvre, and I saw the Mona Lisa. The first painting I ever saw. I did not come inspired. I didn't grow up inspired by. In fact, I was told as a kid, I think at one point I thought I wanted to try painting, and I was told, no, your cousins can paint because your mother was a painter. Your mother is a musician. You're going to learn to play the piano. So they gave me, this is shocking to me, they gave me a piano for my 10th birthday. I have no musical talent. I can't clap in time to anything. There you go.
Wow.
So that just killed it. I never again considered it. Until, when I lived in Bethesda, I took a sculpture class at Glen Echo, and my husband saw my work, Alan, and he said, you have to do this. You have to. He was my inspiration every day.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I can see the impact that he has had in inspiring you. These pieces are absolutely stunning, to the point that I mentioned we have acquired one of your pieces. The one in the center here was one that we bought when we first moved into this gallery. I believe it was actually at the plein air, was it?
The watercolor show.
Watercolor show. My wife Becky saw it and absolutely loved it. She didn't even have to ask me. She bought it, and I said, great choice. It's a wonderful. Can you tell us a little bit about that piece?
Well, that piece, I have a similar piece that I did many, many years ago in a class with Bob Yonke, who was an extraordinary painter from Garrett County, although he's in Florida most of the year. And his big emphasis was using water and letting it happen. And I really liked the piece I did with him, but I didn't like the colors. And it hangs in my bathroom, as a matter of fact. And I wanted to repeat that same feeling of the flow of the water, and use a lot of water and not much pigment.
I love it when artists understand when to let something take its own course and to allow negative space. And I look in this piece, and I love the choices that you made, in that you left white space completely open, and the white space, the empty space, becomes part of a color within the piece. This piece reminds me of where we live. We live up in George's Creek, and where we live, there's water everywhere flowing down the mountain, and it just feels like the moisture coming down the mountain, and every morning the fog takes on a characteristic that rolls through the creek, through the valleys, it moves up the hills, and it becomes its own emotion, its own living process. And I look at this piece, and it actually embodies that exact experience out here.
Well, you see you lit a fire in my head. How do you know when you're going to start a painting? I have not painted a fog painting in years, and now I want to paint a fog painting. So I'll be doing a fog painting this summer.
Excellent. So many of your pieces invite viewers to slow down, to observe, to interpret. Do you think that your work is intentionally meditative, or it just comes across that way?
It certainly isn't intentional. But that is my state of mind when I am painting. To be honest, I consider it a spiritual experience. When I am painting, the world stops. The year I had cancer, I had chemo for 6 months, and I was in the studio every day, and at the end of the 6 months, I had something like 40 paintings I'd done, because that was where I could go to be quiet, get peace, and have joy.
So, reflecting back on, you started painting late in life, this understanding that, what you just said, the health effects of art, of painting. What advice would you give to people, not young people, people mid-life or older who want to begin painting?
You know, I've taught a lot of those people over the years. I like to teach beginning watercolor, because people don't watercolor because they're afraid of it. Bob Yawkey used to say that the biggest enemy we have is fear. And people are usually afraid of it because they don't have any control over it, which is the whole goal as far as I'm concerned. I don't want any control. And I just think that I like to teach beginners, first-time painters. I'm doing it right now with a woman. Because I know I can teach. I'm really good at that. I did it for 30 years. And I know that when they walk out of my studio, they are going to be thrilled with what they did. But it's very directed in the beginning, because people are afraid of it. They're afraid to be out of control. They're afraid of what's going to happen. They're afraid they'll fail. So what if you fail? You know, turn it over and do the other side.
So, walk us through a little bit more about the creation of a watercolor painting, both the challenges and maybe the joys there. And it's a very difficult process. The water does not behave necessarily like you want it to. Sort of give us some instruction on how would someone begin to choose to paint in watercolor?
I'm not sure how, I know how I teach people to do it. When I have a beginner, I provide the first drawing for them, because I don't want to get hung up on drawing. That's not what they're there for. And they all say, I don't know how to draw. Neither do I, but I do it. And I talk that it's a follow me process. I start, they imitate. I start, they imitate. I do this part, they imitate. And I will do that with people for the first 2 or 3 paintings. And then by then we've talked enough about how do you create a painting that I then give them the assignment of taking a photograph, taking a part of it, doing a drawing. Then I critique the drawing a lot, because they don't know things about perspective. They don't know a lot of stuff yet. And that happens over time.
So, not being a painter myself, even though I own a gallery, I don't paint. With watercolors,
you need to come to my house.
I know I do, right?
You'll walk out with a painting.
I think Becky and I need to go over, and we'll bring the wine and we'll paint together. So, my interpretation is that water runs.
True.
So you probably would not start at the bottom. You would start at the top. Or do you paint flat? Which do you?
I don't paint flat. I paint on an angle, and I usually start at the top. I usually start there just because every time I start a painting, I'm convinced I can't. I'm not a confident painter. I'm not a confident artist. I just do what I need to do every day. So I start at the top usually, and then I will move down a little bit. By then it's taking on a value that I need a contrasting value, so I'll then go into an area where I can put usually a darker value in. So I do a lot of barns. I'm absolutely hooked on barns.
Why is barns?
Well, I couldn't figure that out for a long time. And I mean, I would drive around the county. I still take pictures of barns, and I have about 4 of them that I repeatedly paint. I just change the venue, the scene, the season, the lighting, something. I couldn't figure it out why I was hooked on these stupid barns, which is fairly obvious. I was married to a psychiatrist, that I should have figured out my grandparents had an 800-acre farm, and I loved being there in Spokane, Washington, and they had these fabulous barns. Goes back to my childhood. A lot of what I do has to do with where I came from. A lot of it.
So we own a barn, a couple of barns on our property as well. And
can I come?
Absolutely, you have to come. It's way up on top of the mountain overlooking Western Port. And
good, let's go.
We'll have you come up there, you can paint on top of the mountain. We have a couple barns, and they always reflect a different color at different times of the day. Everything from browns to blacks and grays and even whites hidden in there where the wood has gotten quite old. Sometimes blues or even reds reflecting the light of the day. So I can see that definitely.
I'm looking at that one. We better take that out. I need to add some color. The very first lesson I had was of a barn. And it was one of the greatest lessons in the world I learned about painting. And that barn I look at all the time because it's hanging up there in the studio. And it has some red, it has some green, it has some brown. And it's probably one of the better barns I ever did, and it was the first day.
So are you going to be in the artist's studio tour?
Oh, that's my subject. I love that subject. Yeah, the only person in Garrett County. No one comes to me, but by golly, I support it. And we have one in Garrett County the last weekend of July, and it's only one weekend, and we probably will have, I don't know how many artists we'll have, maybe 20, 25. But I have a thing about studio tours. I built my studio so I could do studio tours. Until then, I was painting in my house. But I really feel strongly about demonstrating during studio tours because I believe that if people see how art is made, their appreciation grows, and maybe they'll spend money. But money is not the motivator for me. I like it, I love money, but it's not why I paint. That's why my prices are so low. I've never raised them in 30 years. I'm going to this year. But I believe that showing people the process of how art is made. So when I'm on studio tours, I have 3 stations set up. One of them is for watercolor. And it's always, I'm not painting, now I don't just paint a painting. What I do is I choose a subject matter, I do a drawing, and I choose 2 different surfaces to paint on to show people that you can paint on different surfaces. And sometimes it'll be on a glossy surface, sometimes there's always a watercolor. But I'll have 1 drawing, 2 paintings, same colors, but different surfaces to show the difference of what happens on different surfaces when you paint. So I always have that set up on studio tours. I always have alcohol inks to set up because people are fascinated with how that goes. Because that involves putting alcohol on a paper, squirting some ink in, and using an air compressor to push it around and to build the work. And often, lately, I've been offering to let anybody try it who wants to try it. And they're just fascinated with that process. And then I always have monoprints set up because, again, people don't understand how this is a monoprint here. That was done on a cookie sheet with a piece of saran wrap underneath the gelatin and a gelatin mold. And the saran wrap does that one have it as much? Not as much as the other ones did. Provided lines would make it look like the wind was blowing. And it was, so I do monoprints to show people how, and kids love to see that. And I find that the monoprints that I do are really organic. I mean, I just am hooked on leaves, and I'm not good, they're just organic. Then I will usually say to people, go out to my garden, pick some leaves, and I will use them to you can make a monoprint. Kids love to do it, and I always let kids do it. So I always demonstrate all three things according to who wants what when they're in there.
So you'll be exhibiting at the Loft Shop. Will you have something here as well?
And here in the studio, in this gallery, yes, I will.
Very good.
Yes, I will bring you here.
Thank you.
I don't miss the opportunity to be seeing, I will tell you that.
So the Loft Shop is where your studio and gallery is. During the artist studio tour in mid-October, keep an eye out when we post this video. We'll post details about it. How can people find you if they want to come to your studio?
I'm an easy find, about 30 minutes from here. Take 68 to exit 19, take a left on Bidding Road, 495, follow it for 8 miles, slow down as you come to the corner, the big yellow sign is the Loft Shop.
There we go. Excellent.
It's very easy.
Excellent. So I think I have one or two more questions and then we'll open it up to the audience. Looking back on your journey, what has surprised you most about becoming a full-time artist?
That I am one. Are you kidding? I didn't plan this. I mean, this was not my dream, my desire, my goal. I didn't expect any part of it. I was astounded when people started to buy things from me. Those people were amongst my first customers, Barry and Lynn. And, it's just, they put a new addition on their house a few years ago, and they invited us over, and we went over, and they have a big, long hallway. And I went, and it's all art. They have fabulous art. They have great taste. And I looked and I said to them, you have too many of mine, you're not allowed to buy ever again. And they did.
So final question is, what is next for you? You have some ideas on pieces. I just sparked one of them. What's next for you?
I thought I was going to change. The Loft Shop is a business I've had for 37 years. And it's changed enormously in recent years in Garrett County, how a tourist and how everybody buys things. And I'm not doing the kind of business I want to do during the Loft Shop. And so this year I had planned to have open studios once a month and invite other artists to join me. A few days ago I made the decision that's biting off a little more than I can chew right now, because it turns out I'm going to be hanging a show in the Performing Arts Center in July, and I really need to focus on getting that ready. So what's next is that I have some projects that I haven't done for a long time. I saw one, who showed me that? Oh, my stepdaughter. I was talking to her yesterday, and she was showing me, FaceTiming me, a piece of art of mine that she has. And I had forgotten that I did that stuff. And what I do is I take 2 paintings, which I don't particularly like, and I cut them up and I weave them together to create one painting, which is kind of like when we used to make placemats when we were kids. And they are really, can work really, really. I haven't done that for probably 10 years. That's on my list of things I want to do. I have a list of stuff I want to work on. I think we're hanging a winter show here in the fall, and I have 2 paintings on my mind that I really... So now what have I listed? 4 paintings in my head right now, right? Meanwhile, I have to get ready to do the Performing Arts Center.
The Performing Arts Center, tell us about that.
Performing Arts Center. Performing Arts Center is located at Garrett County at the college. It was... we worked on trying to have a performing... This was the only county... Garrett was the only county in Maryland that didn't have a Performing Arts Center until 2 years ago when it opened up. We worked for 25 years to get it funded, to get a plan, and to get to do it. And it's owned by the college, the county, the school system. Who's the other one, Barry?
Stage West.
Well, Stage West is it. It was called GLAF for many years, Garrett Lakes Arts Festival. 1, it's in Garrett. 2, it's not lakes, and it's not a festival. So we went through a whole revamping of this organization this year at Stage West, and it puts on performances in this Performing Arts Center. It's a state-of-the-art Performing Arts Center. It is absolutely stunning, has a huge room, 3 times the size of this room, which could be used for other things with people in the community. Stage West will be putting on, I think, 9 performances this year. The next one is going to be the MSO, Maryland State Orchestra, on the 15th, because it coincides with plein air. And I have obligated myself way too far in either one of those, but it's going to be plein air exhibit is the Friday night and MSO is Saturday night. It's worth coming up there to see. We have, the last performance we had was Shakespeare and Jazz or something, I can't remember the name of it. It was a trio and that came, and what they had taken was certain lines out of Shakespeare's work and created a piece around it with this jazz group. It was world-class, stunning stuff. You guys gotta come up and see it. It's really a great art.
I think we have to do that. Absolutely. My wife's out there shaking her head, absolutely.
I'll give you dinner first.
You've got a lot going on.
I'm busy.
Yeah, so let me see if I can recite all those. First is the performing arts hang that you're going to be doing. Then there's plein air coming up. There's the artist studio tour. And then we're doing a watercolor society exhibit here during the holiday season, where the entire space will be transformed and great paintings that reflect the region with an annotation to the season. So think of what the season's like out here in the winter, and it should be quite beautiful.
It will be.
And that's a lot of work you've got to do.
Well, that's just not, I have always, I do all my matting and framing, but I love this stuff, and I feel that, I am the luckiest woman in the world that at 55 years old, I got a huge passion. And I just feel so fortunate, and I love doing what I do. And I love the people, studio tours, the people who go on studio tours, particularly if they come on Alleghenies, but they don't. I don't get that many people. But it's worth it for me to get to talk about it, show it, and do it.
That's going to be a great event. There's going to be a lot of artists. All of them are opening up their studios. This will be a hub for people to start the tour, where they will see at least one piece from many of the artists. They will get a map, directions where to go, and then they can take off across the county, Western Maryland, and really see these amazing studios, sit with the artists and learn from them, explore their art. It's a really great event. Sue, why don't we open it up for questions?
I can't imagine what they're going to ask me.
I know, we've covered everything, right?
Anybody have anything to ask?
Anybody have any questions? We have a microphone out there as well, so that everybody can pick it up accordingly. I'm sure you have questions. You all know Sue quite well.
Uh-oh.
So you said you didn't paint flat. Why don't you paint flat?
Because
what happens when you paint flat?
You don't have as much control. You don't have much control anyway, but it tends to puddle. It tends to just absorb into there. Jim McNeil had another project, had a technique he did where he took the paper and he soaked it and got the watercolor paper soaking wet, and then he rolled a towel over it and absorbed it. And you got to try this, Mary. And then you have your paper is wet. You paint on it really, really wet. And it's a whole technique. I just remembered the other day that I haven't done. But it's really so it doesn't puddle. Yeah.
You have a question?
Yes. Have you ever felt drawn to painting faces?
To paint what?
Faces.
What'd you say?
Faces?
Portraits.
People's faces?
I don't like people.
No, that's not true.
I have no desire to paint people or pets. None. I have no, and I admire people who can do it. Your husband could. He was fabulous. I just have no desire to paint people. And the other part is that I have no desire to paint sad. I mean, people have said to me over the years, your paintings are always so happy. They are. They are. I use happy colors and they're not sad. It's a joyful process for me. I'm not here to express my feelings, my emotions, my angst in life. God knows I have enough angst. I'm here to entertain myself by enjoying doing what I'm doing. It doesn't make me sound very professional, does it?
A question over here?
Oh, this is tricky. When she...
I had no idea that you had gone through all you did with chemo. And I wondered, how did that journey affect what you painted?
Really? You didn't know that, huh? I was quite something. I didn't have a hair on my body there for a long time. I think how it affected me was that I learned through doing it as much as I did that year. It was in 2004, 21 years ago, that the spiritual process of doing this, the joy of doing it, the distraction of just color and form, and it just totally absorbed me. When I did it then, as I do now, I'm rather lost in what I'm doing. And David, I've taken from some fabulous people over the years. And David Daniels is one of them. He's down at Tacoma Park. If you haven't seen his work, come to my house. I have one. I have a gallery in my house, more or less. And he, he talks about if you can't paint, paint in your head. And it's true. I've been doing a little painting in my head since I've been talking to you. It's just such a process of being and feeling productive, feeling like I'm functional, that I'm doing something. Chemo was really not a pleasant process, although I knew I was not going to die. I was absolutely convinced I was not going to die of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And the reason that I felt certain about that, there were two reasons. Can I talk about this right now?
You can go right ahead.
God. I went to an oncologist here in Allegheny County, and I took an instant dislike to the man, as did my husband, with valid reason. So we had to find another oncologist, and a friend of ours had gone to Hagerstown, so I went to Hagerstown. Now, I've had cancer for probably 2 or 3 months at the time, and couldn't find anybody to treat me that I could work with. And so I went to Hagerstown, and I'm sitting in this doctor's waiting room, huge waiting room, and I'm just absolutely terrified. Needless to say, I've been sitting on this, and it had gone from one lump in my neck to looking like I had grapes growing under my skin. It was growing very rapidly, and I knew it. And I'm sitting in this waiting room in this oncologist's office, and I said, I gotta walk. And I got up, and I turned around, and I walked behind, and there was a painting hanging behind me by Alexis Levine.
Wow.
And I said, we're in the right place, this is gonna work. So I knew, is that weird or what? So then, the first chemo I had, which was a little tricky because my heartbeat went up to 220, and I had to stop my heart and start going again, and at the end of the treatment that day, the oncologist came in and said, feel your neck. And I felt my neck and the lumps were gone.
Wow.
So I kept painting.
Wow. So when I first began, I talked about how we in the gallery, my wife and I, believe strongly that the arts in all their form are good for the soul. They're good for your mental health, to immerse yourself in the arts. It could be performing arts, to shut down the world outside and just pause and consume. Stare in front of a painting. We had a gentleman last night was going from each bench to each bench, sitting upright, very stiff and staring at every piece for a long period of time. And that process of consumption, of consuming art and pausing to reflect. When I say it's good for the soul, things that are good for the soul are good for the mind. And things that are good for the mind are good for the body. There is a correlation. And I hear what you're saying sort of emphasizes that point that there is a healing effect that art has on the body.
You know, I think it was Matisse during his final years that he did the cutout. He surrounded himself with the cutouts. And I remember seeing that show down in Washington when I lived there. And my son, who was with me, who's now almost 60 years old, remembers that show as clearly as I do. And what they did was they surrounded his bed with his cutouts, and they were stunning. And you know, I think anytime you see art, did not grow up in an art family. It wasn't valued, it wasn't done. But I do believe that when you see art that impresses you, that hits you, that it stays with you. In the questions you gave me, you asked what artists have been an influence on my life. And certainly Alexis Levine, certainly Jim McNeil, certainly people I have studied with. But I was in Amsterdam several years, not too many years ago actually, in the Van Gogh Museum. And I remember I wept through the whole museum. This is the lesson I learned that day. You can paint the same thing over and over and over again, the same subject matter, and change the lighting, change the season, change where the barn is. It's okay. It's okay as long as that you want to do it and it's you motivated. That's what I learned.
I think that's a great ending. Feel free to paint. Pick up a brush. Sit down with you and take one of your classes.
Come on over. I'll let you do anything you want.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Sue, for coming out. This has been a real pleasure. I think I've learned a lot. I really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone.